There is a particular kind of man who believes he has thought of everything. He plans, he calculates, he considers every possible outcome and chooses the one that costs him the least trouble. He walks into a room and reads it in seconds. Who holds the power, who wants it, who is pretending not to. He is precise, he is armored, he is, by every measure that matters in a kingdom like Ashbourne, untouchable. Duke Gregory Kensington was exactly that kind of man, and one golden afternoon at the king's coastal retreat, standing at the edge of the beach terrace with a glass of brandy in his hand, and a perfectly managed conversation happening beside him, he looked toward the water and stopped. There was a woman walking out of the sea. The afternoon sun caught the wet fabric of her seaside bikini and turned it to light. The breeze lifted her dark hair off her shoulders. She raised her face to the sky, with her eyes closed, unhurried, and entirely unaware of the effect she was creating, and every single man on that beach went quiet. Gregory knew her. He was looking at his wife, the woman he had married specifically because he was certain, absolutely, strategically, completely certain, that no man would ever notice her. Every man was noticing her. And Gregory Kensington, the most composed, most unshakable duke in the kingdom, felt something crack open in his chest that he had never once felt in his 32 years of perfectly managed living. Jealousy. Pure, irrational, deeply inconvenient jealousy. And out on that sunlit beach, with her chin lifted toward the sky and her dark hair loose around her shoulders, Vanessa Kensington, who had spent most of her life being told she was forgettable, had absolutely no idea. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you were not enough, this story's for you. Stay until the very end, because the way this ends, you will not see it coming. Like this video, subscribe if you are new, and let us begin. Chapter 1. London, in the spring of 1842, ran on whispers, not the quiet kind. The loud, breathless, traveling kind. The sort that moved from one drawing room to the next before breakfast, was even finished. And in that particular spring, the whisper burning through every aristocratic household in the city was this: Duke Gregory Kensington had finally chosen a wife. That news alone was enough to send half the noble women in London into a state of barely concealed excitement. Gregory Kensington was, by every reasonable measure, the most eligible man in the kingdom. He was 32 years old, the holder of one of the oldest and wealthiest dukedoms in Ashbourne. He was tall in the way that made other men unconsciously stand straighter. When he entered a room, his jaw was sharp, his shoulders were broad. His dark eyes had a way of settling on a person that made them feel simultaneously seen and found slightly wanting. He was also famously impossible to read, not cruel, simply armored, closed in the way that some powerful men are closed, not from coldness, but from calculation. Gregory had watched too many men of his station marry women who loved their titles more than anything else, and he had decided, quietly and firmly, that he would not be among them. He had watched those same men spend years tormented by rivals, by admirers, by the exhausting business of other men looking at their wives and finding them beautiful. Gregory was not a man who handled that kind of thing gracefully. He did not share what was his. The very thought of standing across a ballroom watching some earl lean too close to his wife and smile too warmly, it made something tighten in him that he refused to examine too carefully. So Gregory did what Gregory always did. He made a plan. He would marry a woman that no man wanted, not a woman who was unkind or unintelligent, simply one that society had set aside, a woman with no suitors, no admirers, no men positioning themselves for her attention. A woman so thoroughly overlooked that marrying her would produce exactly zero jealousy, zero rivalry, and zero romantic complication for the rest of his life. He had settled, after careful consideration, on Vanessa Hawthorne. The choice stunned everyone. Vanessa's father had been a baron, respectable bloodline, acceptable name, but Baron Hawthorne had died 4 years prior, leaving behind modest means and a quiet household. Vanessa's mother had passed when she was 12. She lived now with her widowed aunt in a small, comfortable house, well outside the social conversation. As for Vanessa herself, the fashionable ladies of London had decided years ago what she was. They had looked at her and seen someone plain, someone who wore last season's colors and shrank slightly in loud rooms. They had filed her under unremarkable and moved on, the way you set aside a book with a dull cover without bothering to open it. What not one of them had done was look closely, not closely enough to notice that her eyes, when something genuinely interested her, lit up like a room coming alive, not closely enough to hear that her voice, low and unhurried and warm, had a quality that made people lean in without knowing why, not closely enough to see the way she moved through a room with quiet grace, as though she belonged everywhere she went, even when the room was making it clear she did not. They had decided she was forgettable and gone back to talking about themselves. Vanessa was 24 years old. She had spent the better part of a decade being invisible to the people who decided such things, and she had made a quiet, practical peace with it, the way you make peace with weather, not happily, but without fuss. She was not without joy. She had Phoebe Sinclair, her best and closest friend, golden-haired and bright and loud in all the ways Vanessa was not, but the kind of woman who walked into rooms and instantly owned them. Phoebe spent a significant portion of her considerable energy trying to pull Vanessa into the light alongside her. Vanessa resisted, mostly. She was more comfortable at the edges. She spent her days helping her aunt, reading every book she could find, and visiting the village children who had somehow adopted her as their favorite, unofficial teacher. She helped them with their letters. She told them stories. And she did not think too often about the fact that her life, while genuinely pleasant in many ways, was also genuinely quiet in a way that was beginning to feel permanent. She had accepted, without quite saying it aloud, that love was probably not coming for her. And then came the night of Lord Pemberton's spring ball. It was, by all accounts, a brilliant event. The townhouse blazed with light. The guests were a glittering assembly of London's finest, earls and countesses, viscounts and their wives, young ladies in their best gowns doing their best to appear effortless, young gentlemen doing their best to appear as though they weren't noticing. The music was excellent. The champagne was cold. Vanessa arrived with her aunt and positioned herself near the refreshments table. It was, as always, the safest place. Close enough to appear sociable, far enough from the dancing to avoid the specific discomfort of not being asked. Phoebe found her within minutes, arriving in pale yellow silk, cheeks flushed with the pleasure of simply existing. "You look lovely," Phoebe announced. "That shade of green suits you tremendously now. Do not look yet. The Duke of Kensington is here tonight." "All right, now look," the tall one near the far window. The very tall, very dark, very stern one, who appears to be suffering from the experience of being at a party. Vanessa looked. And yes, there he was. Gregory Kensington, standing near the tall window at the end of the ballroom with a glass of something, amber in one hand and the expression of a man who agreed to attend an event and is now quietly regretting it. Two men were speaking to him with great animation. He was listening with minimal interest. Even from across the room, he was commanding, not loudly, in the quiet way of deep water. Vanessa looked for 3 seconds and then looked away. "He is very handsome," she said, in the tone of someone commenting on the weather. "He is a duke," Phoebe said meaningfully. "And I am the impoverished daughter of a dead baron. Phoebe, please." Phoebe made a noise suggesting she found this tedious, and was fortunately distracted by a friend on the other side of the room. Vanessa refilled her glass. She watched the dancing, She was having a perfectly adequate, entirely unremarkable evening. Which was why, when the voice arrived directly beside her left shoulder, she was completely unprepared for it. "Miss Hawthorne." Not a question, not warm, simply her name, spoken in a low, even voice that cut through the noise of the room with the clarity of a struck bell. She turned. Duke Gregory Kensington was standing 2 feet away from her, dark eyes looking down at her with steady attention, his hand extended. Vanessa stared at the hand, then at him. Then she looked briefly behind her, to confirm he had not confused her with someone else. No one was behind her. "Miss Hawthorne," he said again, with the very faint ghost of something that might have been amusement. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Everything inside Vanessa's small sphere of awareness went completely still. She took his hand. They danced. He was an excellent dancer. Of course he was. Guiding her through the steps with the quiet confidence of a man who was never worried about doing anything wrong. He did not speak for most of it. He simply led, and she followed, and the music moved around them like water. Then, as the waltz wound toward its end, he spoke. "Your father was Baron Hawthorne." "He was. He passed 4 years ago. You live with your aunt currently." "I do." He was quiet for a moment longer. His eyes stayed on her, not warmly, not coldly, watching, the way he might read a document for the second time. As the last note faded and they came to a stop in the middle of the floor, he said, "Miss Hawthorne, I wonder if I might call upon your aunt tomorrow morning." She looked up at him. "To what end?" Something shifted in his expression, just barely. "To discuss a formal arrangement," he said. "A marriage proposal." "That is what I am rather clumsily describing." Across the room, Phoebe Sinclair made a sound that was half gasp and half delighted squeak. Vanessa's fingers were still lightly in Gregory's. She had just become aware of this. "Why?" she asked. Just that one word. He held her gaze for a moment. Something flickered behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. "I have considered the matter carefully," he said, "and I believe we would suit." It was not a romantic answer. But then, it was not a romantic proposal. And Vanessa Hawthorne, who had made her peace long ago with the idea that love was not coming for her, said the only sensible thing she could manage. "I will speak with my aunt." He inclined his head. The music started again. By the following morning, it was the only thing anyone in London was talking about. Lady Vivienne Carrington, widely considered the most beautiful woman in the city that season, and by most social calculations, the frontrunner for the Duke's eventual choice, received the news over breakfast and set her teacup down with a precision that was slightly too careful to be natural. "Vanessa Hawthorne," she said, in a voice like cut glass. "He has chosen Vanessa Hawthorne." Her companion nodded. "The woman has not had a single suitor in 4 full seasons," Vivienne continued. "Not one. She hides near the refreshments table at every event she attends." Why would Gregory Kensington choose her? No one at the breakfast table had an answer. Vivienne filed the question away like a small, sharp splinter. Small enough to ignore, impossible to forget. She would find the answer eventually. She always did. Chapter 2. The wedding of Duke Gregory Kensington and Miss Vanessa Hawthorne took place on a cool morning in early June, 6 weeks after the proposal. Kensington Manor, the Duke's primary estate, 30 miles outside London, was prepared with the kind of thorough elegance that money and excellent staff could produce. The chapel gleamed, white roses and green ivy lined every surface. The guest list was long and the company was exactly what one expected of a ducal wedding. Vanessa wore ivory silk and carried white roses. Phoebe wept from the moment she arrived and made no effort to stop. The ceremony was brief and correct. The vows were spoken, the ring was placed, and Vanessa Hawthorne became, formally and completely, Vanessa Kensington, Duchess of Kensington. She stood in the receiving line and smiled at 200 guests, and thought, with the private honesty she reserved only for herself. "This is what I have. Let me make something of it." The first weeks of marriage were fine. That was the honest word, fine. Polite. Correct. They had separate bedrooms. No surprise. And Vanessa had accepted it with a practical nod she was quietly proud of. They took meals together most evenings, at a dining table considerably longer than necessary, with candles burning between them and pleasant, empty conversation about the estate, the weather, and occasionally books. The one subject on which both of them had genuine opinions. Gregory was unfailingly polite, respectful, dutiful in the way a good man is dutiful when he has decided that is the thing he will be, regardless of feeling. He remembered that she preferred her tea without sugar, that she liked to walk in the mornings, that she found large, noisy gatherings draining. He accommodated these things without comment. He simply never reached for her. Not physically, not emotionally. He was like a magnificent house, every fire lit, every room beautiful, everything precisely in its place, from which the people had been gone for years. Vanessa explored Kensington Manor slowly. It was extraordinary, enormous and graceful, filled with art and long windows over grounds that looked like paintings. She fell in love with the library immediately, the way she always fell in love with libraries. It was the warmest room in the house. She went there every morning after her walk, and every evening before bed, and it felt like the one place where all the human feeling that hadn't quite reached the rest of the house had gathered quietly and waited. She befriended the housekeeper, Mrs. Hadley, a compact, no-nonsense woman who had run Kensington Manor for 12 years and who also managed the Duke's London townhouse when they were in the city. Mrs. Hadley took to Vanessa with a quiet approval, expressed through practical kindness rather than words. Vanessa wrote long letters to Phoebe. Phoebe wrote back longer ones. She did not let herself be unhappy. She allowed herself to notice the unhappiness, acknowledge it the way you acknowledge a bruise, and then set it aside and find something useful to do. What she had not expected was that Gregory watched her. Not obviously, not in any way she could point to and name, but sometimes she looked up across the dinner table and found his gaze on her face for a half-second, too long before he looked away. Sometimes she heard what might have been his step slowing outside a doorway while she was in conversation. Sometimes she said something small and sharp and funny at dinner and saw something start to warm in his expression, and then close again before it quite arrived. She filed this away without knowing what to make of it. Meanwhile, there was Vivienne Carrington. Vivienne appeared at 2 London dinners during their first month as a married couple, and Vanessa noticed her the way you notice a source of heat. Not dangerously, simply with awareness. Vivienne was beautiful without any charitable interpretation required. Golden hair, pale blue eyes, the kind of effortless elegance that made dressmakers feel their work was worth it. She smiled at Gregory with the warmth of a woman who had expected something and not received it, and had not yet decided to let it go. To Vanessa, she was perfectly pleasant in a way that contained no warmth at all. "You must find London rather overwhelming," Vivienne said at the second dinner, settling beside Vanessa with a smile like fine-print porcelain, beautiful, hard, cold, coming from such a quiet background. "I find it quite manageable," Vanessa replied pleasantly, "though I prefer the country, more books, fewer opinions." Something sharpened behind Vivienne's smile, very slightly, the way a blade sharpens on stone. Vanessa noted it and returned to her soup. What Vanessa did not know was that Vivienne had already begun asking questions, careful questions, in the right ears, in the right drawing rooms. She wanted to know why Gregory had chosen Vanessa Hawthorne, and the absence of a clear answer irritated her in a way she could not release. She would find out. She always found out. But that was still some months away, and for now, summer was arriving. And with summer came an invitation that would change everything. It arrived on a Tuesday in late July. Heavy cream paper, the royal seal. The king's coastal estate was hosting its annual nobility retreat. 6 weeks, sea air. The kind of gathering that made reputations and, occasionally, history. Gregory read it over breakfast without expression. We are expected to attend. The journey is 3 days by carriage. 6 weeks in total. I have no objection, Vanessa said. He looked at her briefly. She looked back. The small, careful adjustment of two peoples still learning how much space to give each other. Very well, he said, and returned to his newspaper. Vanessa poured her tea. Neither of them knew, sitting at opposite ends of that long table, that they were 3 weeks away from a beach. And a moment that would take everything they had quietly arranged between them and turn it completely, permanently upside down. Chapter 3. The king's coastal estate was called Whitecliff, and it was the most beautiful place Vanessa had ever seen. It sat at the crest of white cliffs that curved around a bay of impossible water. Deep blue that shifted to green near the shore and to pale silver, where it broke across the sand. The manor was built of white stone, broad and gracious, with long terraces that stepped down toward the beach. In the mornings, sea mist turned everything silver. In the afternoons, the sun turned everything gold. Vanessa stood on the terrace their first evening and felt something inside her chest loosen. She had not realized until that moment how tightly she had been holding herself. The other guests arrived over the first 2 days, dukes and earls and viscounts and their families, filling the estate with a comfortable noise of people settling in. Perhaps 60 guests in total. Gregory was, as always, immediately absorbed into the company of men with things to discuss and power to manage. He was courteous to Vanessa when their paths crossed, and otherwise occupied with the serious business of being important. Vanessa found a chair on the lower terrace, borrowed a book from the estate library, and settled in to enjoy the view. She was managing very well. She was, in fact, almost content. And then Phoebe arrived. Phoebe's husband, Arthur Sinclair, had received his own invitation to the retreat, a development Phoebe had apparently decided required no advance announcement. She appeared on the lower terrace on the morning of the second day, in a sweep of yellow muslin, looked at Vanessa, sitting quietly with her book, and announced, with the authority of someone who has already decided the outcome, "We are going to the beach." "I am perfectly happy here," Vanessa said. "You are hiding here. There is a difference." Phoebe sat down beside her. "Vanessa, we are at the most beautiful place in the kingdom. The sand is white, the sea is warm. There is every opportunity to be seen and enjoyed, and you are sitting here with a book whose spine is soft on the left side, which means you have already read it." Vanessa looked down at the book. The spine was, in fact, soft on the left. "I enjoy rereading," she said with dignity. Phoebe ignored this. "There is a bathing hour tomorrow afternoon. I have arranged a bathing costume for you." Before you say anything, she cut off Vanessa's breath of protest. "I want you to know it is beautiful, tasteful, and that you will look magnificent in it." Vanessa closed the book. "Phoebe, I am not the sort of woman who stands in front of 60 members of the nobility in a bathing costume." "Why not?" "Because I am not." She stopped. "Because I am not that sort of woman." The cheerfulness dropped from Phoebe's face, replaced by something older and realer. "Vanessa Hawthorne, Kensington. You have been saying that for 24 years. You are not beautiful enough, visible enough, worthy enough of being seen. You have decided to live at the edges of your own life, because a collection of shallow, unobservant people failed to see you, and you believed them." Her voice was quiet and fierce. "I am asking you, as your dearest friend, to try it. Once. Tomorrow afternoon. Wear the costume, go to the beach, let them see you." Vanessa sat with that for a long moment. She looked out at the water, bright and restless below the cliffs. She thought about a long dinner table with too many candles between two people with nothing to say to each other. About 24 years of edges and corners and careful, polite invisibility. "All right," she said quietly. Phoebe let out a breath, as though she had been holding it for quite some time. "I will send the costume to your room this evening," she said. "You will not regret it." The costume arrived that evening as promised. Vanessa held it up in her room and looked at it. It was white. Two elegant, well-cut pieces of fine sea cotton, what the fashionable ladies of the coast called a seaside bikini, designed for noble women vacationing by the water, tasteful by every measure, modest enough for any well-born lady, and yet entirely unlike anything Vanessa had ever worn in her life. She felt an entirely unreasonable amount of apprehension about a piece of fabric. She reminded herself she had agreed. She set it on the chair beside her dressing table, got into bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, she put it on. She stood before her mirror for 1 full minute. The woman looking back at her was... She looked away before the thought could finish. She pinned her dark hair loosely up, left a few curls loose at her neck, wrapped a light shawl around her shoulders, and went to find Phoebe. The bathing beach was below the lower terrace, reached by a stone path through the coastal grass. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels generous, where the sun gives itself freely and the sea sparkles as though it knows it is being looked at. Several guests were already gathered along the shore when Vanessa and Phoebe arrived. Ladies on blankets, gentlemen wading in the shallows. Laughter carrying over the sound of the waves. Vanessa kept the shawl on until they reached the water's edge. "Go," said Phoebe pleasantly. Vanessa went. The sea was cold at first, sharply, briefly cold, the kind that makes you gasp and then, 2 seconds later, makes you feel more awake than you have felt in months. She went in up to her knees, then her waist. Then, on a decision that surprised even herself, she dove. The water closed over her and the whole world went quiet. Under the surface, everything was green-blue and weightless. Light came down in long, shifting columns. The noise of the shore dissolved into a soft, deep hum. She hung there in the cool silence, and felt, clearly, completely, with no argument from any corner of herself, entirely like herself, not the careful version, not the invisible version, just herself. She came up into the light. Gregory Kensington was standing on the beach terrace with Lord Alexander, Montgomery and 2 other gentlemen, deep in a conversation about Crown land policy, when Montgomery stopped speaking mid-sentence. "Good heavens," Montgomery said. Gregory turned. He looked toward the water, and the conversation, the land policy, the afternoon, the entire managed and controlled world he had been inhabiting, simply stopped. A woman was walking out of the sea. She came slowly, out of the shallows and up onto the pale sand, the afternoon sun hitting her all at once. Her dark hair was loose now, wet around her shoulders. She tipped her face up toward the sky and closed her eyes, just breathing, and the white seaside bikini she wore caught the light and the breeze, moved the fabric, and the water still glistened on her skin, and she was. Gregory knew her. He recognized her face, her posture, the particular unhurried way she moved. He was looking at his wife. And yet, and here was the thing that arrived in him like a door opening onto a room he did not know existed. He had never in his life seen her before. Not like this, not with the sea still on her skin, and her eyes closed, and that quality, that extraordinary quality, of being entirely, completely herself. No performance, no awareness of being watched. Just a woman standing in the afternoon light, belonging to it, belonging to herself. He had sat across from her at dinner for 2 months. He had spoken with her every evening. He had registered her presence the way he registered everything, efficiently, practically, sufficiently, and he had never once actually looked at her. The realization landed in him slowly, with the weight of something that has been falling for a long time and has only just hit the ground. Beside him, Alexander Montgomery let out a quiet, appreciative sound. "Lovely woman, do you know who she is?" Gregory's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. His voice was perfectly level, completely level, far too level. He became aware, in the next several seconds, of exactly how many men on that beach had gone still. Lord Whitmore near the far rocks, young Captain Ashby and his companions. Two other gentlemen whose names he could not immediately place, neither of whom was any longer interested in whatever they had been doing. They were all looking at his wife. Gregory set his glass down on the stone railing. "That," he said to Montgomery, in the careful tone of a man maintaining his composure by the narrowest of margins. A pause. "Oh," said Montgomery, a longer pause. "Right," said Montgomery, and cleared his throat. Gregory was already moving. He descended the stone path to the beach with the measured, unhurried stride of a man who is absolutely not behaving unusually in any way, and if the most direct route to his wife happened to pass through the space between her and approximately 4 other men who were showing an interest, he found poorly timed. Well, that was simply the geography of the beach. Vanessa had wrapped her shawl back around her shoulders and was laughing at something Phoebe had said when she looked up and saw her husband walking toward her with the particular stride he used when he was being very deliberate about appearing relaxed. She frowned slightly. He reached her. He stopped. He looked at her. For 3 full, silent, entirely extraordinary seconds, he simply looked at her. "Your Grace," she said, "because when there is no other script, formality is always available. Are you well?" His voice was slightly lower than usual. "I am perfectly well. I have been swimming." "Yes," he said, "I can see that." A silence. Phoebe, standing 2 feet to Vanessa's left and vibrating with the effort of not visibly reacting, converted what threatened to become a delighted sound into a small, dignified cough. From across the beach, Captain Ashby and his companions were drifting in this general direction at a gentle, sociable, entirely transparent pace. Gregory noticed. "Will you walk with me?" he asked Vanessa. Not quite a command, not quite a question. Something between the two. Vanessa studied him for a moment. Those steady, dark eyes reading his face the way she always read things, thoroughly and without pretense. "All right," she said. They walked together along the water's edge in the late afternoon light, while Phoebe stood on the shore behind them and allowed herself one very small, very private smile. Gregory spoke very little on that walk. He asked about the water temperature. He commented on a formation of sea rock, with the manner of a man pointing at sea rock purely to have something to point at. Vanessa answered each question and waited quietly to understand what was happening. She did not yet understand it, but something had shifted on that beach. In the moment her husband had looked at her and, for the first time since their wedding, had not immediately looked away. She could feel it, the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it. Something quiet, something new, something beginning. Chapter 4. In the days that followed, Gregory Kensington behaved in a manner that was, by any reasonable measure, completely unlike himself. He became attentive. Not in the dutiful, managed way of their early marriage, in a different way. A way he would have struggled to explain if anyone had asked, which was fortunate because no one asked directly. They simply noticed. He began appearing at Vanessa's side at every gathering, with a reliability that had not previously characterized him. Not hovering. Gregory did not hover. Hovering was beneath his dignity, but present, positioned. When she moved from one group to another at the evening terrace parties, he was somehow already beside her at the new group. When she settled into her chair on the terrace with her book in the mornings, he appeared within 20 minutes with his own papers and took the chair beside her, rather than across from her. He brought her things. a novel from the estate library left on the table beside her breakfast. No explanation, only a brief look that said clearly, "I noticed what you enjoy." A small jar of honey she had admired at the village market 3 days earlier, presented with zero ceremony. A shawl, produced from apparently nowhere, the evening the sea breeze turned cool. Each small thing arrived with no explanation, and a great deal of the kind of silence that is not actually empty. Vanessa received all of it with genuine warmth, and the quietly flustered feeling of a woman who had spent months being managed and was now being seen, who was receiving attention she had no framework for. From a man who was no longer playing by the rules she had established for their arrangement. She said nothing about it to Phoebe, because Phoebe would combust with joy, and the conversation would be very long, and Vanessa was not yet ready to examine her own feelings out loud. What she did not know was what was happening inside Gregory's head. What was happening was this. Gregory had become, with remarkable speed and absolutely no plan, fascinated by his own wife. It had started at the beach. That quality of being entirely herself, unperformed, unguarded, had cracked something open in him that would not close again. And once it was open, he found himself noticing things he had not once registered in 2 months of living in the same house. He noticed that she laughed only at things that were genuinely funny. He noticed that she spoke to servants with the same easy courtesy she used with dukes, not performing warmth, simply having it. He noticed that when she disagreed with something, she said so, clearly and without apology, and moved on without belaboring it. He noticed the way she listened, truly listened, leaning slightly forward, giving her whole attention, not already preparing her next sentence. He noticed her hands. He noticed the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. He noticed that she had quiet opinions about everything, and offered them only when she meant them. And then there was the other matter. The matter of every other man noticing her, too. Gregory was finding this extremely difficult to handle with the calm he would have preferred. It began with Alexander Montgomery, who was good-natured and entirely too comfortable, seeking out Vanessa's conversation at every gathering. Then there was young Captain Ashby, who danced with her at the first estate evening, and laughed at something she said with an openness that made Gregory, across the room, set his glass down with slightly more force than intended. Then there was Lord Whitmore, who managed to be in her conversational vicinity at 3 separate events in 1 week, and who complimented her reading taste in a way Gregory found inexplicably irritating. He examined the irritation from a careful distance, and concluded it was simply a reasonable concern about his wife's social reputation. He was almost entirely convinced by this. It lasted until the morning he arrived at the beach, having absolutely not checked whether Vanessa was there. He simply happened to be walking in that direction, and found her in laughing conversation with both Montgomery and Whitmore, and felt something he could only describe as the world suddenly running several degrees too warm. He covered the distance to her side in 11 seconds. He had counted. "Kensington," Montgomery greeted him easily. "We were just telling your wife about the sea cave at the far end of the cliff. Extraordinary at low tide, apparently." "Is it?" Gregory said. "There are sea anemones," Vanessa said, looking up at Gregory with those steady dark eyes. "I should very much like to see them." "I will take you," Gregory said, immediately, without a moment's pause. A small silence. Montgomery's expression contained amusement. He was being too polite to fully show. "The tide will be out tomorrow morning," Montgomery offered. "Yes," Gregory said, "I know." He did not know this. He would find out within the next 30 minutes. Vanessa looked at him with an expression somewhere between amusement and something softer, and said, "All right." The following morning, Gregory escorted his wife through the coastal grass to the sea cave at the end of the cliff. They spent an hour in the cool, dim interior, looking at sea anemones in the quiet pools, talking about the tide and the rock formations, and a theory in the book she was reading that she wasn't certain she agreed with. It was not important conversation, it was not eloquent, but she was entirely herself in it, easy and warm and genuinely interested, and he was, for the first time in longer than he could precisely name, not managing himself at all. They walked back to the estate in the late morning, a half step closer than they usually walked. Twice on the narrow path her hand brushed his. Both times, he lost the thread of whatever he had been thinking for approximately 30 seconds. He was beginning reluctantly to accept, in a very significant amount of difficulty. Phoebe Sinclair noticed everything and said nothing. This was extraordinary restraint, and she was aware of it. She watched Vanessa begin to bloom, and it was the right word, bloom. Vanessa laughed more. She carried herself with ease rather than apology. She offered opinions freely in conversation. She wore her hair down one evening because the sea air suited it, and did not apologize for the choice. She was, Phoebe thought, becoming the version of herself that had always been there, waiting for someone to make enough room for it to arrive. And she watched the Duke. The Duke was a man losing a battle with himself and refusing to admit it. Every time he thought no one was watching, and Phoebe was always watching. Something crossed his face when he looked at Vanessa, something unguarded and real and enormous. He was falling in love with his own wife. He appeared to find this deeply inconvenient. Phoebe smiled into her tea and said nothing. She knew Vanessa. The moment anyone pointed at this and named it, Vanessa would immediately find reasons to doubt it, to protect herself from hoping. Let it grow a little longer. Let it become strong enough to hold its own shape before it was tested. At the end of the second week at Whitecliff, Gregory and Vanessa danced together for the first time since Lord Pemberton's ball. It was an evening celebration in the grand hall. Music and candlelight, and the assembled company at its most elegant. Gregory appeared at Vanessa's elbow as the waltz began, offered his hand with the quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision, and looked at her with an expression she had never quite seen from him. Open. Unguarded, almost asking, in the way someone who never asks, making the asking feel enormous. She put her hand in his, they danced, and it was different from the first time. The first time had been correct. Two polite people performing the required movements. This time there was something in the space between them that had not been there before. A warmth, a pull. His hand at her waist was certain and present. Her hand on his shoulder felt like a place to land. They did not speak during the dance. They did not need to. When it ended, he did not release her hand immediately. He held it for one moment, just one, and looked at her with something close to a word he was not yet saying. Then the music began again, and he stepped back, and the moment folded quietly away. Vanessa returned to her seat with perfectly composed posture, and a heart beating in a way she refused to examine. Across the room, Gregory took a drink from a passing tray, looked at absolutely nothing, and wore the expression of a man whose careful, thorough plan has just become extremely complicated. Neither of them knew that Vivian Carrington had arrived at Whitecliff that very morning. Chapter 5. Vivian Carrington came to Whitecliff with an invitation, exceptional luggage, and a purpose hidden beneath her flawless manner. She had spent the past several weeks doing exactly what she had set out to do. The morning she heard the news of Gregory's engagement, she had asked quiet questions in the right places, cultivated the right conversations, and had finally found a gentleman in Gregory's circle, friendly and rather loose-tongued over a good wine, who told her what she had been looking for. Gregory had chosen Vanessa Hawthorne because he believed no man would ever want her. He had wanted a safe wife, an invisible one. Vivienne had sat with this information and turned it over carefully. Then she had waited for the right moment. The invitation to Whitecliff was it. She arrived, greeted everyone with warmth and grace, and then she watched. She had not expected what she saw. The Gregory Kensington she had known for 3 years, composed, impenetrable, untouchable, was not entirely in evidence. In his place was a man who positioned himself near his wife at every gathering, who watched her across rooms with an attention that was not subtle if you knew what to look for, who had all the air of someone trying to appear completely at ease and failing in the most telling way. Vivienne watched this for 2 days. Her expression remained serene, but something inside her that had been merely cold became considerably harder. She had not expected him to fall in love with the woman. She had come here expecting to find 2 politely distant people and a perfect moment to drop her information and watch it land. She had not expected this, the dance, the sea cave walk, the way Gregory currently looked at Vanessa, the way a man looks at something he is afraid of losing. It did not change what she intended to do. If anything, it sharpened it. She chose her evening carefully. What Gregory did not know, what he was still in the middle of discovering, was exactly when it had stopped being fascination and become love. It was not the beach. The beach was simply the first time he had been forced to look. After that, the looking kept happening, and each time it showed him something new. It was the evening she corrected something, he said, very quietly, very precisely in passing, and he felt absurdly proud of her. It was the afternoon he found her in the estate garden talking to the gardener's young son about the names of the coastal plants, giving the child her complete, genuine attention, as though there was nowhere else she needed to be. It was the night the sea turned rough and thunder rolled over the water, and he found her on the terrace at midnight in her dressing gown, leaning on the railing, watching the storm. He brought a blanket without thinking and put it around her shoulders. She turned and looked at him in the dark with half surprise and half something much softer, and said very quietly, "Thank you." And he stood beside her and watched the storm and felt more at home than he had felt anywhere in years. He did not say it. He did not yet know how. He had lived inside his own silence for so long that the words, 3 simple words, felt like things he had no practice carrying. He turned them over privately, looking for the moment, the approach, the right arrangement of courage. He was 3 days from finding it when Vivienne found it for him, in entirely the wrong way. It happened on the 28th evening at Whitecliff. The gathering was warm and relaxed, terrace doors open to the sea breeze. Vanessa stood near the fireplace with Phoebe and 2 other ladies, laughing, easily entirely herself. Gregory was across the room, watching her with an attention that was not at this point particularly subtle. Vivienne moved through the party smoothly, pausing here and there, and arrived beside the group of ladies with the ease of a woman who is very good at arriving places. After several minutes of pleasant conversation, with the precise timing of someone who has rehearsed the moment, she let it fall, not loudly, not dramatically, simply, casually, as though it were a known thing, a small piece of social history requiring no particular care. "I always found it rather touching," Vivienne said lightly, addressing no one in particular, "that Gregory arranged his marriage the way he did. He was always so specific about it, wanting a wife who would attract no attention, no rivalry, no admirers, someone society had thoroughly overlooked. He told Lord Farthington himself, apparently. He simply wanted a woman no other man would want, a perfectly placed pause, a glance at Vanessa with an expression of flawless concern. But of course you knew all of this. I'm quite sure he was open about his reasoning from the very beginning." The group had gone quiet. Vanessa was very still. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was completely level. She set down her glass, smiled at the group, a slight, composed, utterly unreadable smile, and walked away, through the open terrace doors, into the night. Chapter 6. The terrace was empty. Vanessa walked to the far railing, where the stone overlooked the dark beach and the water below, and she put both hands on it and breathed. The sea was quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that makes everything inside you louder by contrast. She heard the words again. She always heard things again, with a memory that was accurate and exact, and which she had, at various points in her life, wished was a little less so. He simply wanted a woman no other man would want. She had known from the very beginning that there was a reason she had not been told. She had asked him on the night of the proposal, and he had given her nothing, only that he believed they would suit, and she had accepted it because she was 24 years old. And he was standing right there with his hand out, and she had been waiting for something for a very long time. She had not expected love. She had not been foolish enough for that, not at the start, but she had hoped, quietly and carefully. The way someone hopes when they have learned to keep hope small so it does not cause damage when it fails, that they might grow into something real, something mutual. And she had thought, these past weeks, that they had been doing exactly that. She had noticed everything he brought her. The way he walked close, the way he danced with her, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the look on his face, before and after and during, that she had been so carefully, privately allowing herself to read. She had been beginning, in the fragile and significant way of someone who has not hoped, in a very long time, to hope, and now she understood the foundation. He had chosen her because he believed she was not enough, that no man would want her, that she was so thoroughly invisible she was safe to acquire, not chosen for any quality she possessed, chosen for the qualities he assumed she lacked. She was not crying. She was too still for that. She was standing at the railing in the dark, in the particular stillness of someone whose carefully built structures have just been quietly taken apart. She heard the door. She knew his step by now, unhurried, quiet, controlled. Vanessa. His voice was low. There was something in it she had not heard before. A tightness. A pressure, as though he were holding something very carefully. She said nothing. What Vivian said, he stopped. I owe you. Is it true, she said. The quiet stretch between them. The sea moved below. Yes, he said. One word. No hedging, no reaching for a better version. Just yes. She absorbed this. She had known he would not lie to her. She had always known this about him. It still arrived like cold water. You chose me, she said, because you believed no man would ever want me. My reasons at the beginning were not worthy of you. They had nothing to do with who you are. They were about my own fears, my own pride, and your reasons now, a silence. Vanessa. Something had been stripped from his voice. My reasons now are entirely different. I want you to know that. Everything between us since we arrived here. I need to go inside, she said. Please, I am not angry with you. She turned from the railing. She looked at him directly, and he looked, she noted, terrible. Good, he should. I am not angry. I simply need to think. She walked past him, back through the terrace doors, through the warm, bright gathering, with her head up and her spine straight, found Phoebe with one look, and sent her a signal, then continued up the stairs and into her room and closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet, and was very still for a very long time. The days that followed were the longest of Gregory's life. He had spent 32 years being the most composed person in any given room. He had never experienced the specific helplessness of having made a mistake he could not manage his way out of. He was experiencing it now. Vanessa was present. She came to meals. She attended gatherings. She was perfectly, impeccably polite. She spoke when spoken to, answered his questions, never avoided him or created scenes. She was simply closed. That warmth, that ease, that willingness to be seen. It had retreated behind something careful and composed, and the distance between them felt, after what it had been becoming, absolutely enormous. On the second day, he tried to speak with her properly. She listened with her eyes on his face, and her expression gentle and entirely unreadable. "I understand," she said when he finished. "I simply need time." She was never unkind to him. That was somehow the hardest part. She quietly returned the small things he had given her during the retreat. The honey, a pressed flower she had kept, a note she had written him about a passage in a book. She placed them on the table in their shared sitting room, without drama and without explanation, and he found them there the next morning and stood looking at them for a while. He went to Vivienne. The conversation was brief. He told her, in measured sentences, exactly what he thought of what she had done. He told her that her presence at the remainder of the retreat was not something he was willing to accept. He said all of this without raising his voice, with the final, clean clarity of a man who has made a decision. Vivienne left the following morning. She had not won, but she had, Gregory thought bitterly, done her damage. On the third morning, Phoebe found him on the terrace. She looked at him with the direct eyes of a woman who loves someone very much, and has decided to be entirely honest. She is not fragile, Phoebe said. She will not break, but she is very careful with hope. She has had to be. She has been told, in too many ways, for too many years, that she is not worth wanting for herself. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Gregory said. Then you know that gifts and gestures will not reach her now, only honesty will, and patience. And the truth of what you actually feel. She left him on the terrace. He stood there a long time, looking at the sea. He could return to being the Gregory he had always been, armored, self-sufficient, untouched. He had that option. He could let them go back to what they were before the summer and manage the distance for the rest of their lives. He could. He was not going to. He thought about the sea cave, the storm on the terrace, the dance, the honey on the breakfast table, the look on her face when she came out of the water with her eyes closed, and the sun on her skin, and something so completely herself in her expression that it had stopped him cold. No, he was not walking away from that. He was going to have to find something bigger than his pride and his silence. He was going to have to find his voice. Vanessa was in the estate library with an unread book in her lap, having the quiet, clear-eyed conversation with herself she had been postponing for 3 days. One part of her said, "You should have known. You let yourself hope, and this is the result. Be sensible. Go home at the end of summer and manage your life, and do not be a fool again." Another part, newer, or perhaps older, said something different. It said, "He was wrong at the beginning. He knows it. Look at how he has been with you these past weeks. The way he looks at you now is not the way a man looks at a convenient arrangement. You know the difference between being managed and being loved. You have always known the difference. The question is whether you are going to let his wrong beginning destroy everything that came after it." She sat with that for a long time. She did not have her answer yet, but she was, at least, asking the right question. Chapter 7. The retreat ended in the final days of August. In those last days, while Vanessa sat quietly with her unresolved question, and Gregory moved through the estate with the restless, focused energy of a man who has made a decision and is preparing to act on it, he did something she did not yet know about. He visited the village near her family's estate, the one she had grown up close to, where she had spent years helping the children's school before her father died. He went himself. Not a letter, not a messenger, himself. He spoke with the Barker family, with the widow Clement, with a Mrs. Atkins who had run the village school, and who told him, without any prompting, and without any knowledge of what he was looking for, that Vanessa Hawthorne had taught her students their letters for 2 years, without payment, and without any expectation of acknowledgement, simply because she believed it was the right thing to do. The people in that village spoke about Vanessa, the way people speak about someone who has genuinely changed the shape of their days. Not politely, not because they were speaking to her husband, because it was simply true. Gregory drove back to Whitecliff understanding, with complete and quiet clarity, exactly what he had looked at for 2 months and failed to see. They returned to London in the first week of September. 3 days by carriage, comfortable and quiet, with the atmosphere of two people being very careful with each other. Vanessa watched the countryside. Gregory looked at papers he was not reading. The distance folded away beneath the horses' hooves. They arrived at the London townhouse in the late afternoon. Mrs. Hadley produced tea. The house settled around them. Life resumed its shape. But something was unfinished. Something had been unfinished since Whitecliff, sitting between them like a sentence that needed its last word. Gregory did not wait long. On the second evening, he came to the library. She was there. She was always there in the evenings now, just as she had been at Kensington Manor. He sat down across from her, looked at her, and said, "I would like to tell you something, if you are willing to hear it." She set her book down. She waited. He took a breath. It was, she noticed, slightly uneven, the most un-Gregory thing she had ever observed, and it made her go very still. "When I proposed to you," he said, "I had a reason I did not tell you. You asked me why, and I gave you nothing. You deserved the honest version then. You deserve it now." He held her gaze. "I was afraid of the kind of marriage I had watched. Other men have, all rivalry and suspicion and the constant business of other. Men wanting what was mine. I am possessive by nature. More than is comfortable to admit. I decided the simplest answer was to choose a wife no one else would want." He paused. "That was how I saw you. As a solution to a problem I had. It was arrogant. It was wrong. And it had nothing to do with who you actually are." Vanessa said nothing. She was listening with all of herself. "Before we left Whitecliff," he continued, "I visited the village near your family's estate. I spoke to people who knew you. The Barker family, the widow Clement. A Mrs. Atkins, who told me you taught the village children their letters for 2 years with no payment, no acknowledgement, simply because you thought it was the right thing to do." Vanessa blinked. "You went there yourself." "I went myself." He was quiet for a moment. "They spoke about you the way people speak about someone who has made a real difference in their lives, not because I was standing there, because it was true." A small silence. "Mrs. Atkins has a very long memory," Vanessa said softly, in the voice of someone unexpectedly undone by being known. "I understood, after those conversations, exactly what I had looked at and failed to see." He leaned slightly forward. "I am not telling you this to excuse my beginning. There is no excuse for choosing a person as a strategy. I am telling you that what I feel now is not what I felt then. It is entirely different. It is," he stopped. Gregory Kensington was not a man who said things before he was certain of them. This was the most certain and the most difficult thing he had ever been. "I love you," he said, "not because I saw you at a beach and felt something shift. Not because other men noticed you, because I learned to see you. Your kindness, your courage, your honesty, your humor, your quiet strength. What I see when I look at you now is the finest thing I have ever been close to." The library was very quiet around them. The fire moved in the grate. London went about its business in the dark outside. Vanessa looked at him. This man she had married, closed and then opening, wrong at the start, and honest now in a way that was clearly costing him something visible. She thought about Mrs. Atkins, about him going to that village himself. She thought about blankets in thunderstorms, about sea caves, about a novel left at her breakfast plate with nothing but a look that said, "I noticed." She thought about that dance, his hand at her waist, the warmth of it, and the look on his face when the music ended, and he held her hand for one moment before he let it go. She thought about hope, about the particular courage it takes to let it exist again after it has been hurt. Gregory, she said. He looked at her. The beginning was wrong, she said. You know it. I know it. A pause. But I have been thinking for some days now about whether a wrong beginning defines a story, and I have decided that it does not. He was very still. I do not forgive easily, she said, with complete honesty. I am not a woman who rushes her own heart. But I am also not a woman who throws away something real because it started imperfectly. Her voice was steady and clear, and what is between us now, it is real. I know the difference. Vanessa, I would like to start again, she said. Properly this time, with both of us actually in it. He rose from his chair. He crossed the room and sat beside her. Not across from her, beside her, for the first time. And he took her hand in both of his. He held it carefully, the way you hold something you understand, at last, the value of. Yes, he said. She looked at their hands, his still and certain around hers. You are rather terrible at this, you know, she said quietly, a short silence. I am aware, he said, and there was something in his voice that was real, warm humor, that rare and genuine thing. I intend to improve. I will hold you to that. I rather expect you will, he said. And something in the room shifted, settled, became something it had not quite been before. 3 weeks later, the Royal Founders' Ball was held at the palace. The grandest event of the autumn season, attended by every person of rank and consequence in the kingdom. They arrived together. This was unremarkable on its surface. They were husband and wife. But if you were paying attention, and many people were, the way they arrived together was different from anything that had come before. Close, at ease, not managing a public appearance. Simply together. Vanessa wore deep blue. A shade she had discovered at Whitecliff suited her, with her dark hair loosely pinned and small curls at her temples. She moved through the gathering with the ease of a woman who has stopped apologizing for the space she takes up. She was, several people noted, quite remarkably beautiful. This was not a new fact. It was simply one that had not until recently been properly observed. Gregory stayed beside her. He introduced her to people with the quiet pride of a man who is not performing pride, but genuinely feeling it. He danced with her twice, both times close, both times real, both times nothing like the managed correctness of their early marriage. And then, in the third hour of the evening, when the supper interval arrived, and the music paused, and the gathered company moved through the great hall with champagne and conversation, Gregory Kensington did something that was entirely unlike anything he had ever done in his life. He stopped in the center of the room. He did not signal or announce himself. He simply stopped, in a space where he could be seen and heard, and the natural silence of a room, noticing something unusual, fell around him. Vanessa turned. Her brow furrowed slightly. He looked at the room, at the dukes and earls and viscounts and their wives, the society women who had laughed when he chose her, the people who had spent months speculating about his peculiar decision. And then he looked at her. I have something to say, he said. His voice was calm and carried without effort. The room went still. When I chose my wife, my reasons were wrong. Not the choice, the reasons behind it. A murmur moved through the crowd. I chose her because I believed, based on nothing more than the collective blindness of this society, that no man would ever want her. I was wrong. I was arrogant. And I was, as anyone who has spent time with the Duchess of Kensington will have observed, completely and profoundly mistaken. The room was silent. The most beautiful thing about my wife was never what I finally saw at the beach. It was everything I had failed to see before. Her kindness, her courage, her intelligence, her way of treating every person she meets as though they are worth her full attention. Because to her, they are. He paused. I was given, through no merit of my own, the greatest fortune available to a man. I was given Vanessa. I am finished being the man who almost missed that. He held out his hand. She looked at it. Those steady eyes moved from his hand to his face, reading him the way she always read him, thoroughly and without pretense. Then she crossed to him and placed her hand in his. The room was completely still for one long moment. And then, beginning somewhere near the back, where someone began it not from obligation, but from something genuine, it filled with the sound of applause. Not polite applause, the real kind, the kind that happens when something true occurs in a room that has been watching performance for so long it has forgotten the difference. "You could have told me that in private," Vanessa said, for his ears only. "Yes," he said. "You did not have to say it in front of the entire kingdom." "No," he agreed. She looked at him, something bright in her eyes that she did not bother to hide. "You are still terrible at this," she said. "Improving," he said. She laughed, that real laugh, from somewhere genuine. He held her hand and listened to it and felt, in the warm and noisy and completely impractical center of a royal ball, like the richest man in Ashbourne. They danced one final time that night. The last dance when the candles had burned lower, and the crowd had thinned, and the music turned soft and slow. He held her closer than form strictly required. She rested her cheek briefly against his shoulder and felt him go very still and then very slowly exhale. They danced in a small circle of candlelight and did not speak and did not need to. In the months that followed, people spoke about them, not with bewilderment or speculation, with the particular warmth reserved for something real. The kind of story that spreads not because it is dramatic, but because it is true in a way people recognize even when they rarely see it. Gregory was seen at every public occasion with one hand at the small of Vanessa's back and a look on his face that his oldest acquaintances could not quite reconcile with the man they had known before. Vanessa was seen every Tuesday in the village near the estate, working quietly with the children's school she had helped organize and fund, with no announcement and no expectation of acknowledgement. Phoebe Sinclair told anyone who would listen that she had known from the very beginning how it would end. This was not entirely accurate, but it was close enough that she felt comfortable saying it, and no one disputed her. Mrs. Hadley remarked to no one in particular, one October morning at Kensington Manor, that the house felt different this year. It felt lived in. On a quiet evening near the end of October, Gregory and Vanessa sat together in the library after supper, a fire in the grate, books open in both their laps. The 3 dogs Vanessa had somehow accumulated over the summer, arranged comfortably around the hearth. All impractical sizes and highly excitable personalities, all entirely Gregory's favorites, despite his continued refusal to say so. Nothing dramatic was happening. 2 people were simply existing in the same room, comfortably, quietly, without effort. After a while, Vanessa looked up. She looked at his profile in the firelight, the sharp jaw, the dark eyes moving across the page, the softness around his expression that she had come to understand as his real face, the one beneath the armored one. "Gregory," she said. He looked up. "I am glad," she said, "that it was you." Something warm moved through his expression, open and unguarded and freely given. "As am I," he said. He reached across and took her hand. She let him. The fire moved. The dogs slept. Outside, October settled over Ashbourne like a quiet blessing. The Duke of Kensington, who had once believed the greatest thing he owned was his title, sat beside his wife in the light of their library and understood, with the clarity of a man who has had to learn the long way, that the greatest thing he had was this, because sometimes the rarest beauty in the world is not found in a mirror. It is not measured by who notices or confirmed by a room full of people finally paying attention. It is found in the way a person kneels beside a child who needs help and gives them her whole heart. In the way she tells the truth quietly and moves on. In the way she stands in a storm and looks at the sea as though she belongs to it. It is the kind of beauty that does not need the light to be seen. It was always there, waiting simply and patiently for someone to finally look. If this story moved you, if you have ever been Vanessa, standing at the edge of a room, wondering if anyone will ever truly see you, leave a comment below. We read every single one. Like this video. Subscribe for more stories just like this one, and thank you, truly, for watching until the end.